Oh, I don't know what that was.
Well, like I was mentioning, Susan Shepard was on our show about a week and a half ago. We were talking about Mothman. Now, in Virginia, and that famous area about Mothman, one of her neighbors, when all this was going on with Mothman, heard a noise out in their barn. And so, he opened up the door and he let his dog out. And then he heard the dog, barking and, making all this strange noise. And then, some really scary noise coming from the dog. And they were really scared, so they locked up their house. And then the next morning, they went looking for their dog. They couldn't find their dog anywhere. Now, a couple miles down the road from their place, there was a dog. It matched the description of their dog next to a sign off the road where it looked like it was dropped, but it was mangled up. So I'm just wondering, when the dog ran out to the barn, to investigate where that noise coming from that barn, maybe the Mothman or whatever the creature was, took off, with the dog. And that's very logical because, last week me and my daughter were, going back way to one of the little stores I go to. We live, near a lot of saltwater canals and then the peninsula up here in Washington State. And, we were going on the road and all of a sudden we saw a duck and its baby duck, right behind it, and an eagle. I'm talking about I slammed my brakes on so I wouldn't hit the duck. And then a big bald eagle just came sweeping down, grabbed the baby duck, and took off. So you could imagine, could you imagine maybe something 6, 7, 8 feet, in diameter, grabbing a dog would be no problem.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It actually reminds me of the Lawndale, Illinois Thunderbird sighting back in the 70s, where this kid reportedly was picked up by this huge, raptor-like bird and carried for several feet before the thing dropped him. That was one, I think, pretty famously Lauren Coleman investigated. He's written about it pretty significantly since. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Like if you're talking about something as big as people describe the Mothman to be, you're looking at something just from the descriptions I get. You're looking at something between 6 to 8 feet tall, with a wingspan of 10 to 12 feet, sometimes 15. And which, by the way, biologically, and this is another reason why when people, like when we start speculating about sort of what Mothman could be, like what are people seeing, it sort of, I start getting away from a more materialist scientific explanation, only because something that was 6 to 8 feet tall with a wingspan of only somewhere between 10 and 15 feet should not be able to fly. That's not nearly enough wing to be able to lift something like that. But anyway, they're big, and somehow they are flying. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, a 50 to 100 pound dog. I don't know what size dog we're talking about.
Well, we're talking a full size German Shepherd.
Oh, the German Shepherd. So probably 150 pounds, somewhere in that range.
Yeah,
right?
around 100 at least.
Yeah, and so I mean, I could see it picking up something like that. I mean, I could lift a dog that big if I needed to, and Mothman's got to be stronger than me. So sure, like that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, it doesn't me either. Kind of reminds me, of Jeepers Creepers, the first one, where this creature, would go out. Well, it would actually sniff people and then make the decision if it was going to be their next, his prey. But some of these reports, like what Susan Shepard was talking about, I'm just wondering how many people in these areas of Mothman maybe disappeared. Because, I if they're aggressive enough to swoop down at a car, going who knows how fast on the road, trying to get away from it, and again, leave scratch marks. Again, some of the stories I've been hearing about Mothman, the same thing, where they'll scratch up the car quite a bit, deep through the paint into the metal. Tells me they have a lot of power behind them. And plus, there's one case where I was told that a Mothman chased that person. They didn't want to go in the air, but they claimed they were doing like 50, 60 miles an hour on a back road. And a Mothman, was right there on the roof of the car and was, trying to like tear into the car.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of. You're absolutely right. I mean, even going back to the 66 to 67 sightings, one of the first sightings involved a few couples who were out at the TNT area, and when they were driving back and being chased by this thing, and they said they were driving up to like 100 miles per hour, and it was keeping up with them. Which, I mean, that's pretty incredible. And, I mean, you know that some of the reports that I've received, that my colleagues have received, like they involve people's vehicles being damaged. Just the one that we talked about tonight, the 1976 Waukegan encounter. That guy's car got scratched up, and he was absolutely terrified. If I'm sure if I went digging, I'm probably forgetting several of these. And so for anybody not maybe as familiar with this Lake Michigan Mothman Slap, I've got over 100 reported encounters and sort of associated phenomena. And that's not even including the sighting reports that we get that I can't investigate up to my standards. So I end up publishing those in like a separate column where I say, well, hey, this is what I got, but I couldn't investigate it that well. So here's just sort of the raw, info with no real follow-up. So there's an incredible number of these. And so I always feel like when I'm talking about them, there's got to be some that I'm forgetting about. And so, maybe I'll think of it later if they're like more of them come to mind that involve cars being damaged or attacks or anything like that. But, Gary, when you mentioned Jeepers Creepers, like that definitely, that rang some bells for me because I have had witnesses use those exact words to describe what they saw. In 2010, I talked to a young man named Dalton, and he told me about, I didn't talk to him in 2010. I talked to him in 2017. But in 2010, he had an encounter, this Dalton, along with one of his friends, with something outside of Rockford, Illinois, that they described as being like the creature from that movie. So Dalton and his friend Nick, they were out doing what, I think a lot of people did. I certainly did when I was a kid and we didn't have anything else to do because I kind of grew up in a smaller farming community. We would go cruise, and there would be endless cornfields, and we would just go out in the country and we would cruise around, and there really wasn't anything else to do. And so he was 16 years old in 2010. So, it was in his early 20s when I talked to him. And, he's out cruising around, he's in his 97 Firebird, and, they're being kids. And they're driving along on this old gravel road outside of town, and it's later in summer, so the corn's pretty high, and you can tell that it's well, and part of the reason that he remembers that it was later in summer too is because as they're out cruising at night here, it was about 11 p.m. And like they would see occasionally farmers doing like night harvesting, basically, which isn't super uncommon, at least around here. And so, like they're out cruising and they're surrounded on both sides on this gravel road with tall rows of corn, and they notice as they're driving they'd actually slowed down because what they wanted to do was a bunch of burnouts. And so I'm sure everybody knows what they are, but just in case you don't, when you have like a sports car and you slow it down or stop it and then suddenly accelerate, your tires will spin out and you'll kick up all kinds of gravel, and it's pretty fun if you're a teenager and you don't care about your insurance premiums or wrecking your car.
Or buying new tires.
Or buying new tires.
Hell
right? Yeah. So they're basically out there doing burnouts, and so they had slowed way down, and they see this movement from off to their side in the cornfield, and so he at that point, Dalton, who's driving, he slows way down because you get a lot of deer out there, and that time of year, you really want to watch out for them because they'll hang out in cornfields and stuff because they're trying to eat the corn. And they'll run right out into the road. And so he slows way down, and they're both expecting for a deer to jump out of this cornfield into the road in front of them. And that is not what happened, because I wouldn't be here telling you about it if it was. Instead, they said that this creature jumped out. He actually described it as, well, he didn't describe it this way. He called it a deer bat, and that's an interesting thing actually that I could talk about at length. Is the names people give these things when they don't really have the words to describe them otherwise because they're too weird. But anyway, so he calls it a deer bat, but what it actually looked like, according to his description, was this huge black winged entity. And so the wings were shaped similar to a bat, and he said that he could definitely see 4 limbs. Now, this happened relatively quickly, so he didn't get a lot of fine detail as far as making out, the exact, sort of structure of the limbs. Like I asked him, for instance, if he thought the thing had 4 legs or 2 arms and 2 legs, and he said, honestly, I don't know, because all I know is it had 4 limbs in addition to its wings. And the other reason that he couldn't make out too much details is because the thing was so dark. Even with his headlights on it, he said, it was pitch black, like just the coloration of it. And so it flies in front of him in sort of this zigzag pattern, and takes off up into the air. And because of its color and the fact that they're in the middle of nowhere, as soon as it's out of the light of their headlights, they just lose track of it. Like you can't see it anymore at that point. And so they just take off. Like they're terrified. Oh, because I should mention too, this is a T-top convertible.
Oh yeah.
And so they got the top off, obviously. And, so they're sitting there, and there's no easy way to get that thing back on, like once you're driving around in it.
Oh, I know from owning one.
Right? And so, like, they just take off. They're terrified that this thing is going to swoop down on them at any second. And later, when Dalton is describing it to me, he says that the closest thing that he could really relate it to, just with sort of his, like, whatever ability he had to describe this impossible creature, the closest thing he could compare it to was the creeper, was the creature from Jeepers Creepers, like that movie. Like, that's what it reminded him of. That's what it's